It's beyond us.
Exactly. It's God's heavenly reality, which might seem far off. But Jesus was claiming that heaven was coming to earth, right here and now, beginning with these people.
That's unexpected.
And so is what he says next.
Blessed are those who grieve, for they will be comforted.
So this group that's at the bottom of society, they know all about loss and grief. But Jesus said something's coming that's going to turn sorrow into joy.
And then he said, blessed are the unimportant, for they will inherit the land.
And these people are not powerful or important, but just wait, Jesus says, because one day it will be you all who are ruling the world.
You know, it kind of sounds like Jesus is trying to start a revolution.
Well, kind of, but it's not a revolution for those who are hungry for power or influence. This is a movement of people who are going to serve because they long for healthy relationships between people and communities and nations.
Yeah, as Jesus puts it next, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy.
Just imagine it. A group of powerless nobodies ruling the world through generosity and forgiveness and justice. This is a Jesus-style revolution.
The next thing Jesus says is, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. And this one really raises the bar. To be part of this revolution, my heart needs to be so pure I could look directly at God.
Well, Jesus knows that all of our choices, even our good ones, are often driven by mixed motives. For Jesus, real peace is only possible through people who know that they need to be transformed if they're going to truly love God and others.
And this sounds wonderful, but it's a radical calling.
That's exactly right. In fact, Jesus goes on to explore just how radical it is.
Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God.
So God's new reality won't just happen by itself. It requires people who are willing to enter into the conflicts of others, urging and helping create a way towards peace.
But that way of life can be dangerous. And so Jesus says, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of the skies.
Yeah, entering into conflicts and advocating for peace, that's not a comfortable way to live. And so Jesus calls people to this peacemaking revolution, and he names the high cost.
Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in the skies is great, for they persecuted the prophets who were before you in the same way. What does that mean, the prophets before you?
Well, Jesus and this whole crowd are Israelites. And in their Hebrew scriptures, God promised that it would be through Israel that his kingdom would be restored over all the world.
But as the story goes, Israel becomes as corrupt and violent as everyone else, and they end up enslaved to oppressive nations.
But Israel's prophets stood up to these kingdoms and criticized their corruption. They said that one day God's heavenly kingdom would break in, starting with a small group of Israelites who would be willing to surrender everything over to God.
So Jesus wants this crowd to see that they're part of that legacy.
Yes, and that's why Jesus concludes this first block of teaching with 3 images from their scriptures.
The first is, you are the salt of the land.
Salt is a mineral that preserves food for a long time. And in the Bible, salt is used as a symbol of God's long-lasting covenant with Israel. Jesus is saying that he and this ragtag group are the launch party of God's long-lasting ancient promises to renew the world.
And then Jesus says, you are the light of the world, and a city on a hill cannot be hidden.
He's referring to the biblical image of God's light, his presence shining out from its dwelling place in the temple in Jerusalem, which was a city on a hill.
But these people, they aren't the rulers. I mean, they don't even live in Jerusalem.
And yet, surprise, Jesus says, you all are God's salt and city and light. You all are the blessed ones, the new Jerusalem that's going to display God's kingdom to all the world.
Now, how can a group of nobodies who follow Jesus become the beginning of a whole new world?
Well, Jesus is going to help them reimagine who God is, who we are, and how we should live and treat other people. That section of the Sermon on the Mount is what we're going to look at next.
We're exploring a well-known collection of teachings by Jesus called the Sermon on the Mount.
Jesus spent most of his time with the poor and insignificant people of his day, and he claimed that God's rescue of the world was beginning through him and them.
What was God rescuing the world from?
Well, it's a rescue from the kind of world we've created by our selfishness and our contempt for others that leads to violence, and it's a rescue into communities of wholehearted love and respect. Jesus described this way of life by using an ancient biblical word, righteousness. A righteous person is someone who consistently does right by God and right by others. Jesus said, those who live this way are entering the kingdom of the skies.
Okay, but life is messy. In any given situation, how are we even supposed to know what it means to do right by everyone?
Yes, that is the question. So remember, Jesus was an Israelite, and the people of Israel had a specific answer to that question that was simple and profound. To do right by God and people, you need to learn God's wisdom.
And how do you get God's wisdom?
Well, for Israelites, you find God's wisdom by meditating on their scriptures, called the Torah and Prophets.
The Torah, that's the first 5 books of the Bible.
Right, in Hebrew, Torah means teaching, though it's often translated in our Bibles as the law.
But these books aren't just laws.
Right, the Torah is a story about God's plan to partner with humans in ruling the world. And when humans ruin that partnership through stupidity and violence, God begins a rescue plan. First, by choosing and then rescuing the Israelites, and then by inviting them into a covenant relationship.
Right, the story of Moses on Mount Sinai. That's where they get all these commands to live by.
Yeah. Now, after the Torah come the prophets, who continue the story. They show how Israel failed to live by God's wisdom by violating those commands. But they also wrote poetry about how that failure was not the end of the story. God was going to bring this partnership to its fulfillment. And for Jesus and his people, the Torah and the prophets, they reveal God's wisdom to anyone who will meditate on them day and night.
Okay, but let's go back to all those commands. How do you find God's wisdom in an ancient law code?
Yeah, totally. The laws in the Torah were ancient even to Jesus, given centuries earlier when the Israelites could live free on their own land. But in the time of Jesus, they were occupied by the Romans. They couldn't even follow many of the laws as originally stated.
Okay, so that's a problem.
And on top of that, the 613 laws in the Torah are not a comprehensive rule book. And so there arose teachers of the Torah called scribes and Pharisees, and they would fill in the gaps by discerning God's wisdom underneath the laws, so they could apply it to other areas of life. For instance, the Torah said Israelites should stop working 1 day a week.
Right, but what counts as work?
Well, the Torah doesn't actually give a full definition, and so the scribes would study the scriptures and provide a comprehensive list that people could live by.
They're applying God's wisdom to everyday life so they can do righteousness before God and others.
Right. Now, Israel's teachers didn't always agree with each other, and Jesus would often wade into these debates, sometimes agreeing and other times disagreeing with the scribes and Pharisees.
And that would make them worry. Maybe Jesus doesn't take the Torah and the prophets seriously enough.
And so Jesus responds to this concern in the Sermon on the Mount when he says, "Don't suppose that I've come to dismantle the Torah or the prophets. I haven't come to dismantle them, but to fill them full."
What does that mean? That Jesus came to fill the Torah and prophets full?
Well, remember, the scriptures tell the story about God's plan to partner with Israel and all humanity in ruling the world. And Jesus claimed that he was taking that story forward, showing how to be righteous and live by God's wisdom.
That's quite a claim.
Yes, Jesus even said that his vision of righteousness was more in line with God's wisdom than anyone else in his day. He said, "Unless your righteousness far surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you won't enter the kingdom of the skies."
That's intense.
It is. But as we'll see, Jesus is offering a bold and beautiful vision of human life. How to build healthy communities and heal broken relationships, and how to transform hostility into honor and respect.
Which is great, but can you give me an example?
Actually, Jesus is going to do just that in 6 case studies. Each time he'll quote a command from the Torah and then explain how it reveals God's wisdom, so that we can learn how to consistently love God and do right by our neighbor.
Imagine a world where everyone treats each other with dignity and respect. And when problems do arise, everyone works hard to do right by each other.
In the Bible, this way of treating each other is called doing righteousness.
And it sounds great, but how are we supposed to know how to always do right by others?
Well, Jesus, like any Israelite teacher, believed that you can learn righteousness through studying God's wisdom that's found in the ancient scriptures, the Torah and the prophets.
So studying things like the laws that God gave ancient Israel.
Exactly. Jesus believed that God's wisdom can be found within those laws if we meditate on them.
Ancient laws can teach us how to do right by each other today?
Yes, and let's watch how Jesus does it here in the Sermon on the Mount. So Jesus will first quote a command from the Torah, and then second, he'll reveal God's wisdom underneath the command.
Okay, let's jump in.
All right, he starts with a pretty intense topic, murder.
Jesus begins, "You have heard that it was said to the ancients, 'You shall not commit murder.'
He's quoting from the 10 Commandments here.
And I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be guilty in the court. And whoever says to his brother, 'You good for nothing,' will be guilty in the high court." Wait, so Jesus is equating anger and name-calling with murder?
He got your attention, didn't he?
Yeah, but obviously murdering someone is worse than just getting mad and calling someone a name.
Sure, but that's not his point. Jesus is provocatively showing how murder, anger, and verbal abuse, they're all surface manifestations of something that is way deeper.
Which is?
How much you value or don't value someone's existence.
I see. Like murder is the ultimate way of saying that someone's life doesn't matter.
And so is losing your temper or belittling someone. These all reveal an attitude of superiority and contempt for the life of another person. It wreaks havoc in our relationships and communities, and it's worthy of serious consequences.
So the wisdom of this command is about way more than just murder. For Jesus, this command is about treating everyone as valuable.
Right. Jesus wants us to see that any time we demean or devalue other people, it's a failure to do right by them. His definition of righteousness means treating everybody as a fellow image of God.
Okay, the next case study is about adultery. You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.'
Again, quoting from the 10 Commandments here.
And I say to you that everyone who keeps on staring at a woman in order to stir up sexual desire, he's already committed adultery with her in his heart. Okay, so Jesus isn't talking about merely finding someone attractive.
No, he's talking about the long, creepy stare, objectifying someone, looking at them like they exist for your own pleasure. And when we do this, we are stripping a fellow human of their God-given dignity, even if we keep our hands to ourselves.
In fact, this is so serious to Jesus. He goes on to say, if your eye or hand is causing you to sin, cut them off. I mean, really?
Jesus was the master of hyperbole. I mean, he just said the real problem is in our hearts, not our eyes or our hands. But he's trying to make clear that the stakes are really high.
Yeah, well, he succeeded.
It's important to remember that Jesus was raised on the Hebrew scriptures, which portray sex as a beautiful thing. But if sexual desire is driving us to dishonor the image of God in others or in ourselves, if it's causing breakdown in our relationships, it's actually ruining us, and we need to do whatever it takes to deal with it.
Well, this doesn't get any easier because the third case study is on divorce. Jesus says, "It has also been said, whoever sends away his wife, he must give her a certificate of divorce." What's going on here? Sending away his wife?
Yeah, in Jesus' day, only Israelite men could initiate a divorce, and that imbalance led to all kinds of problems.
But divorce was allowed.
It was, though only one law in the entire Torah addressed the issue, and Jesus just quoted from it. The law said that if a man initiates a divorce, he has to do it in the proper way and for a legitimate reason.
Okay, so what's a legitimate reason?
Well, this was actually a hot debate in Jesus' day. According to some Torah scholars, this law allowed for divorce only in the case of adultery. But other Torah scholars argued that the law allowed a man to divorce his wife for any reason, even dissatisfaction with the marriage.
Okay, so here Jesus enters into that very specific debate.
Right. Now, if a man could threaten divorce for any reason, that would make it easier for him to abuse his wife. And so, to protect women, Jesus sided with those who limited legitimate divorce to cases of adultery. And he makes this clear when he says,
And I say to you, any man who sends away his wife, except for a case of sexual immorality, makes her the victim of adultery. Okay, and what does that mean? Makes her the victim of adultery.
Yeah, Jesus is being provocative again, saying that if a man divorces his wife for an illegitimate reason, because he's tired of the marriage or just wants to be with somebody else, his marriage covenant is actually still intact.
And that means that any new marriage is an act of adultery.
Right. But notice, Jesus explicitly assigns blame to the men in his culture because it's their selfish choices that are forcing women into these vulnerable situations.
And you can see how this could play out. In a society where only men can initiate divorce for any reason, this could normalize the oppression of women on a large scale.
Totally. In his cultural context, Jesus' statement protects and elevates the dignity of women as images of God.
But what about other ways a marriage covenant can be violated, like neglect or abuse? Would those be legitimate reasons for divorce?
Yeah, those are really important questions that Jesus doesn't address. His focus here is on how this one debated divorce law in the Torah was being twisted and misused by the men of his day.
How they were treating women like objects that could be discarded, like it's no big deal.
But for Jesus, the marriage covenant is designed to create interdependence and mutual respect so that the two can reflect God's image together as one. And that leads us back to the main point of all three case studies. Jesus is showing how God's wisdom in these commands, it's aimed at our core desires and motivations that affect how we treat people.
Someone could strictly follow these rules about murder, adultery, and divorce, but still dishonor and objectify people in other ways.
Right. For Jesus, real righteousness and wisdom means treating every human like they have ultimate value.
Yeah, if we valued others that much, imagine what kind of world we could create.
And that's exactly what Jesus had in mind. His announcement about the arrival of God's heavenly kingdom here on earth, it was meant to reshape our imaginations. God's wisdom invites us to honor the image of God in every person that we meet.
Conflict in relationships is unavoidable. Even with your friends and family, maintaining peace is a struggle.
And it's even more difficult with our enemies, people who are out to get us.
Right. This is true of any time and any place in human history. Where there are people, there is strife and violence.
And this was definitely true in the time of Jesus, when Roman forces occupied the lands of Israel. So in his teachings, Jesus gives a radical vision for how his followers can seek peace in the midst of this conflict and work to repair even the most difficult relationships.
Jesus is an Israelite, and he believes that God's wisdom for relationships is found in the covenant laws given to ancient Israel.
And so in these teachings, Jesus will quote from one of those laws and then show the wisdom that's underneath.
So Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said to the ancients, 'Do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made.'"
Now, in Israel, an oath was a type of promise where you swear by God that you will do what you say.
Like if you want to borrow some money, you could swear by God to repay me.
Exactly. And you can trust me because in Israel's covenant laws, God requires me to keep my oaths.
So oaths are a great way to avoid disputes.
You would think so, but even oaths can be twisted to take advantage of people. For example, what if I swear by God's temple that I will repay you?
Well, I know the law requires you to honor your oath, so it's a deal.
But I didn't exactly swear by God, just by his temple, so I'm not really bound to the oath.
So you're tricking me into trusting you.
Exactly. So Jesus cuts through all of this and says, just don't make oaths at all, by God or by anything else in God's world.
Never make a promise to anyone?
Not quite. His point is that when you do make a promise, don't use God's reputation as a tool to manipulate people.
Right, Jesus says, let your yes be yes and your no be no.
Being a peacemaker starts with a radical commitment to honesty and integrity.
Now, I can see how this works if I started the conflict, but what if someone else starts a conflict with me?
Well, the next case study actually gets into exactly that.
Jesus quotes from the Torah. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
This is a famous line known as the law of retaliation.
Yeah, you harm me, I can harm you back. This kind of sounds like a license for revenge that can get out of hand.
Well, actually, this law was designed to limit the amount of retribution you can demand. It should be equal to the amount of harm done and not more.
So this law keeps peace by restraining our urge to hurt back those who hurt us.
Yes, and Jesus takes the wisdom of this law to a new level, telling his followers, don't even pay back an evil person.
Don't retaliate at all?
Yes, become people who value peace more than getting even.
But letting people get away with evil won't bring peace. You just can't stand by and do nothing.
Hold on, Jesus doesn't say do nothing. Rather, he advocates a really bold and creative response to evil that is nonviolent, so it can open the door for peace.
What does that look like?
Well, Jesus gives 3 examples from his own time and place.
First, he says, whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to them as well.
In the ancient Roman world, a right cheek slap with the back of the right hand was a symbolic way of dominating someone.
And humiliating them.
But Jesus says, don't retaliate. Rather, stand your ground and offer them the left cheek. This will force your attacker to strike with an open right hand. In other words, to strike you like an equal.
And it forces them to treat you as a fellow human being.
Yes, even if it costs you.
Well, next, Jesus says, if anyone sues you and takes your shirt, let him have your coat also?
Yeah, in ancient Israel, taking a poor person's coat was against the law because it's also their blanket to keep warm at night.
But a really uncaring person could find a way around this by demanding their shirt as payment.
Right. So Jesus offers a creative response. Give them your shirt and also give them your coat.
Why would you do that? Wouldn't that leave you exposed?
Exactly. Jesus is being provocative. The goal is to shock everyone around by exposing this injustice through costly generosity.
The third example is whoever forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2.
In Jesus' day, a Roman soldier could force any subject to carry their packs for them up to 1 mile.
How humiliating and dangerous.
And so Jesus says, carry that load not just 1 mile, but 2. The first mile, he might treat you like a pack animal, but by going that second mile, you assert your humanity as you choose to treat him like a friend.
Wait, treat an enemy oppressor like a friend?
Yeah, it sounds crazy. But Jesus is saying that bold generosity can subvert the power games of our world and even turn enemies into friends. And that leads to the last law that Jesus quotes.
You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.
Jesus is quoting an ancient biblical law when he says, love your neighbor. But then he quotes a popular line that many Israelites added to the law, but you can hate your enemy. Jesus counters this by telling his followers, love your enemies and pray for those who mistreat you.
Now, isn't this going a bit far? Peace with my enemies is one thing, but loving them?
Yes, Jesus seems to think that true peace is only possible when we treat every human as if they have ultimate value, which means that even my enemy is a fellow image of God.
But how am I supposed to love someone who hates me? It's hard enough to love the people that love me.
And our love for our friends and our family is a good thing. But for Jesus, that is just the starting point. He challenges his followers to share that same love outside our circles of comfort. And he holds up God's indiscriminate, generous love as the model.
Jesus says, God causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous.
The call is to become peacemakers who are inviting others in, working to mend broken relationships at every level in our communities.
It really is a radical way to live.
Yes. Jesus calls it becoming complete when he says, be complete just as your heavenly Father is complete. It means imitating God's generosity to both friends and enemies, because for Jesus, creative love is the only pathway to real peace.
Jesus of Nazareth, one of the most influential people in history, taught that the truly good life flows out of a close, intimate relationship with the creator of the universe.
Yeah, Jesus believed this was the ultimate treasure of human existence, receiving God's love. And Jesus said, doing righteousness is our response by giving that love back out to others.
Now, Jesus also lived in a culture where showing your devotion to God publicly will increase your reputation. So, it would be easy to turn your intimacy with God into a performance to get public praise.
Exactly. And so, in a group of his teachings called the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus warns his followers about that temptation.
Be careful that you don't do your righteousness in front of people for the purpose of being seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in the skies. So, acting like you're close with God might gain you social status or applause.
But Jesus says that's really all you're going to get. Jesus describes this performance as being a hypocrite, which comes from the Greek word hypokrites, which refers to a stage actor putting on a show.
So, how can I know if I'm becoming a hypocrite? I mean, that seems like an easy trap.
Yeah, it's super easy. And so Jesus offers 3 case studies. He uses the 3 most common ways in his day that Jewish people expressed their devotion to God, beginning with generosity.
So then, when you give generously to those in need, don't signal it with a trumpet, as the hypocrites do in the town squares or streets. They do that to be honored by people. And I tell you the truth, they have fully received their reward.
So, in Jesus' culture, public displays of generosity were a way to celebrate God's generous love. But they could also become a way to promote yourself.
So Jesus offers an alternative. When you give generously to those in need, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving is done privately. And your Father who sees what is done in private, he will fully reward you.
So, one foolproof way to make sure your generosity is really done out of love is to do it in ways other people can't see.
But didn't Jesus also teach to let your light and good deeds shine as an example for others?
Well, yes. When you consider all of Jesus' teachings on generosity, we see he regularly called his followers to give generously because it displays the heartbeat of God's love. But be careful and self-critical, he says. If there's even a hint of inner hypocrisy, it's probably wise to do your giving in private.
It would be easier if Jesus just gave one clear rule.
Maybe, but what he's given us is wisdom, and that forces us to cultivate a closer relationship with God, trusting that he'll show us when to give in private or more publicly. He makes the same point in his second case study about prayer.
And when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites who love to pray while standing where people gather or on street corners so that they can be seen by people. I tell you the truth, they have fully received their reward.
In Jesus' culture, most Jewish people stopped whatever they were doing multiple times a day, and they prayed a traditional prayer from the Torah, called the Shema. Jesus himself was known for his consistent devotion to prayer. But be careful, he says, because even your prayer habits can become a strategy for public praise.
Right, I can imagine the temptation to conveniently find yourself on a busy street corner when prayer time comes. I mean, people will think I'm really devout.
And if that's what you're after, congratulations. You will probably get people's admiration, but that's all. So Jesus suggests a different way.
But when you pray, go into a room, shut the door, so you can pray to your Father in private. And your Father, who can see what's done in private, he will reward you.
Prayer is about spending time with God, sharing your thoughts and concerns, and trusting that he will hear and respond. The easiest way to check your motives for praying is to do it when no one can see. But again, this is not a rule, it's wisdom. Jesus prayed alone and also together with his followers. Both are important ways of connecting to God.
The third example Jesus gives is about fasting. When you all fast, don't look gloomy like the hypocrites. They make their faces look disfigured, so their fasting will be seen by others. I tell you the truth, they have received their reward.
So fasting is a way of praying with your body by withholding your own physical needs like food and drink, and then inviting God's presence to meet you in that place of need.
But even fasting can be used as a performance.
Yes, so be careful, like Jesus says.
But when you fast, anoint your head with oil, wash your face, so your fasting isn't visible to anyone except your Father in private, and He will reward you.
Now, notice that in all three cases, Jesus does not say to ditch these practices.
Right, express your devotion, but find creative ways to do it so that you don't treat God's love like a trophy.
Jesus knows that his followers will be most effective in the world when they care the least about their social standing, because their ultimate goal is simply to know and be known by the God of generous love.
We just looked at 3 warnings for those committed to a relationship with God. And one of those was about prayer.
Next, we'll look at the very center of the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus teaches his followers how to pray.
Prayer is based on this belief that we can somehow talk with the God of the universe, which is pretty mysterious. Where do you even start?
Well, at the very center of a collection of Jesus' teachings called the Sermon on the Mount, he taught his followers a simple prayer to adopt as their own. The prayer has 2 short halves, each with 3 requests. The first half focuses on God's purposes in the world, and then the second half addresses our concerns in day-to-day life.
So it's a short prayer.
It is. But this little prayer contains a whole new way to look at everything in the world.
Jesus begins the prayer this way: Our Father who is in the skies. So God lives in the sky?
Well, in the Bible, the skies or the heavens are a way of imagining God's universal power and presence that are above all things. In God's realm, God rules as the king whose will and purpose are always done.
But Jesus doesn't refer to God as king.
No, Jesus calls God our Father.
That's a bold thing to claim about the God of the universe.
It is. But a key claim in the Bible is that God has appointed humans as representatives and beloved children to embody God's wisdom and rule in the world.
But the story of the Bible is about humanity's disregard for this calling, how we make a mess of things.
And so the prayer continues. May your name be recognized as holy.
Now, holiness, that's a fancy religious word.
Sure. In the Bible, holy signifies God's one-of-a-kind status. God is the source of all reality and the author of life, and it's this God that calls the family of Israel out from among the nations and then attaches his holy name to them, setting them apart as holy representatives to all the other nations.
But just like all of humanity, they mess up this calling.
And that led to Israel's defeat and subjugation to many empires, bringing dishonor on God's holy name. But Israel's prophets, like Ezekiel, said that one day God would restore the holiness of his name among the nations.
How?
Well, by raising up a new representative who will restore God's rule over Israel and the world, so everyone can see how holy and good God really is. And that's who Jesus claimed to be when he went around announcing the arrival of God's kingdom.
And that makes sense of the next lines of the prayer. May your kingdom come, and may your will be done, as it is in the skies, so also on the land.
Jesus taught his followers that when we love God and our neighbor, when we treat others with God's generosity and justice, we are entering God's kingdom. And so this is a prayer for the reunion of heaven and earth, and we are invited to participate.
Okay, that's the first half of the prayer, focused on loving God and seeking His will.
The second half shifts to the challenges of daily life as we pray for God's kingdom to come.
Give us today our daily bread. That's as basic as it gets, asking God to provide food.
Yeah, Jesus is using an image from Israel's story when they journeyed through the wilderness and God provided just enough bread each day.
That's a tough place to be, not knowing where your next meal will come from.
And remember, Jesus' audience was filled with poor people struggling to get by during the Roman occupation. And so he invites them to join their ancestors in the wilderness, trusting God's provision each and every day.
Wow, okay. And the prayer continues. Forgive us our debts, as we also forgive those indebted to us.
Jesus made forgiveness central to his movement. He announced that God was forgiving Israel and all humanity for its long history of violence and greed, and so he calls his followers to do the same, to forgive those who hurt us.
But we can't go around forgiving everyone. I mean, won't evil spread unchecked? Won't people take advantage of you?
Well, for Jesus, the problem is that our desire for revenge just keeps the cycle of pain going. He taught that forgiveness begins with naming the wrongdoing, but then not seeking vengeance.
So that doesn't mean becoming best friends with the person who wronged you.
No, but it does mean releasing my right to get totally even with them, and even learning to pray for their well-being instead.
That kind of forgiveness requires radical trust in God.
Yes, Jesus invites us to see that forgiveness is like breathing. In order to truly receive and take in God's forgiveness, you have to be in the habit of giving it out. The two work together as one.
Finally, Jesus prays, "Don't lead us into the test, but deliver us from the evil one." So wait, God might test us?
Well, remember the biblical story, how God appoints humans as his representatives in ruling the world? That opportunity presents them with a choice.
Will they partner with God and rule by His wisdom?
But along with every choice, there's a voice whispering that we could do things our own way, by our own wisdom. And that voice twists the test into a trap and forces us to decide whose voice will we trust.
So Jesus invites us to ask if we can be spared from tests altogether. Like, can I just live a normal life, please?
But Jesus also knows that even normal life is full of choices that will force us to trust God or something else. And so when we find ourselves in a trial or a test, Jesus urges us to ask for protection from the evil one's lies.
And with that, the oldest form of the prayer comes to an end. Short and powerful.
But check this out. This is Jesus' own prayer that he prayed himself.
Really?
Yeah, the night before his execution, Jesus went to a garden to pray. And while he didn't want to die, he called out to my Father, saying, "Let your will be done, not mine."
Oh, that is this prayer. May your kingdom come and your will be done.
Jesus had been praying this way for so long that when his greatest test came, his arrest and execution, these were the words that carried him through.
And Jesus was delivered from evil when God raised him from the dead.
Right. In fact, it was through his act of self-giving love that God's forgiveness and heavenly kingdom came to earth. This is how God's holy name was restored.
So this prayer that Jesus taught his followers, it's a way to make Jesus' story our story.
The prayer invites us to daily trust God and to love and forgive each other so we can participate in the story of heaven and earth becoming one.
Jesus of Nazareth was a first-century Jewish man who claimed that he was uniting God's domain above with our domain below. He called this the arrival of God's kingdom.
Jesus invited people to follow him so they could enter into that heavenly realm here on earth in their day-to-day lives. And that's what he's talking about in the collection of teachings called the Sermon on the Mount.
Now, if you really believed that God's heavenly life was available here and now, that would change your perspective on just about everything,
including your possessions. In fact, Jesus said the biggest obstacle to experiencing God's heavenly life and presence is our stuff. The word Jesus uses literally means the stored up things, so our storage.
Okay. Yeah, some people do have a lot of stuff, but it's natural to collect things. Stuff can make life easier. Stuff can give me security. Stuff gives me freedom.
Well, we think that it does, but Jesus says not so much.
Don't store up your stuff on the land, where moths and nibblers destroy and where thieves break in and steal. Okay, but what if I just protect my stuff?
All right, but now your attention is going to be on keeping your stuff safe. Jesus says the good life comes when our attention is directed elsewhere.
Store up for yourselves the stuff of the sky. Sky stuff? What's this sky stuff?
Well, it's a kind of stuff that is so secure that it can't ever be threatened. And it's different from our stuff here on Earth. It's the stuff that God's heavenly kingdom is made of. And the more you collect it, the more you'll experience that kingdom here on Earth.
All right, how do I get that kind of stuff?
Well, Jesus said that we can experience God's heavenly kingdom now, when we love God and love our neighbor. It's that rich experience of peace and fulfillment, those moments when heaven and earth unite when we follow the teachings of Jesus.
Like a kind word or an act of generosity? Offering forgiveness and showing compassion?
Yes, store up that kind of stuff. Because the loving relationships that we cultivate now will last into the renewed creation. And what we store up has a way of slowly shaping us in its image, for better or worse. Or, as Jesus puts it,
Where your stored up things are, there too will be your hearts. Okay, so I should focus my hopes and desires on what really matters.
right. In fact, next, Jesus uses a vivid image to describe this focus.
The lamp of the body is the eye. So then, if your eye is good, your whole body will be radiant.
This phrase, good eye, is the figure of speech in the Hebrew Bible for being really generous, while a bad eye is a metaphor for being stingy, hoarding your stuff. Jesus warns that a bad eye is the quickest way to ruin yourself.
But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be dark. If the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Yikes. So maybe I should give away all my stuff.
Maybe. Jesus once told a wealthy man to do just that. Ultimately, it's about our priorities. Here, Jesus tells a parable.
No one is able to serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You are not able to serve God and wealth.
Wealth is like a tyrant that demands our loyalty.
I might think I own my stuff, but before long, my stuff will own me.
And this danger is real. And so Jesus is pretty blunt. Our stuff can prevent us from experiencing the union of heaven and earth in our lives.
Okay. But let's be real. I need things to survive. I need food. I need clothes.
Well, Jesus has one final teaching about our stuff that brings all these ideas together. He invites us to consider how God has packed creation with abundance, each creature having just what it needs. Jesus says that if you trust God as a generous Father and prioritize loving God and loving others, you will find that your needs are met. And you'll find the rich peace of heaven and earth uniting in your own life.
I say to you all, don't worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, not even about your body, what you'll put on. Isn't life more than food and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. How they don't sow seed, and they don't harvest, and they don't gather into barns, and yet your Father in the skies feeds them. Aren't you much more valuable than they are? And who among you is able to add an hour to your life by worrying? And about clothing, why are you all so worried? Pay attention to the lilies of the field, how they grow. They don't labor, and they don't weave cloth. But I tell you all, not even Solomon in all his glory clothed himself like one of these. Now if the grass of the field, which is there today and tomorrow is tossed into the furnace, is clothed this way by God, won't he make sure to clothe you all who have so little trust? So then don't be worried, saying, what will we eat? Or what will we drink? Or what will we wear for clothing? For the nations constantly seek for all this stuff. For your Father in the skies knows that you need all this. Rather, first, seek for the kingdom of God and do right by God, and all these things will be added to you. So then, don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow can worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Jesus called his followers to live with radical generosity, to be peacemakers who love their enemies, and to hunger and thirst for right relationships.
Jesus called this way of life a greater righteousness because it fulfills God's will for his people that's expressed in Israel's scriptures, the Torah and prophets. But in this section of his teachings, called the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus gives some warnings about potential traps along the way.
Traps?
Yeah. For example, when you spend a lot of time studying God's wisdom in Scripture, it's easy to start thinking of yourself more highly than you should, ignoring your own blind spots. And it can feel natural to start handing out God's wisdom to others when you think they need it.
So the earnest quest for doing good could lead to a lack of self-awareness and a judgmental attitude?
Exactly. That's why Jesus opens his teachings on this topic by bluntly saying,
Do not judge. Well, that's a way to avoid the trap, I guess, but it's not easy when I see other people living foolishly.
Jesus invites us to take our instinct to judge others and instead empathize with them. How would I want to be judged if I were in their place? What standard would I like to be measured by?
Well, I'd like to be judged fairly, for a start.
Right. The problem is we're often unaware of our own character flaws and of the biases that can distort how we see others. This is why Jesus continues with a well-known parable.
Why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but you don't notice the beam in your own eye?
Jesus takes that impulse to judge others and he redirects it as an opportunity for critical self-reflection.
Okay, so if I see someone who I think is being angry and I feel like judging them, I take that as a chance to reflect on my own issues with anger.
Right. Or as Jesus says,
First, take the beam out of your own eye, and then you can see clearly the speck in your brother's eye. Okay, so let's say I've dealt with my issues. Now it's time to remove that speck.
maybe Jesus doesn't actually give us a formula for what to do next.
But if I notice that a person's choices are clearly hurting them, I should help them, right?
Not always. Sometimes people are not in a place to receive help. Offering God's wisdom will only make them angry, so it's actually unwise. Jesus uses a riddle to make this point.
Do not give what is holy to dogs, and don't throw your pearls in front of pigs.
Jesus is drawing on an idea from the biblical Proverbs. Don't correct a fool, or you could become like them.
Wait, so leave people to ruin themselves?
Not necessarily. Sometimes you should step in and help. That same proverb continues, correct a fool according to his folly, or he'll be wise in his own eyes. So knowing when or when not to get involved requires discernment.
So it takes wisdom to know when to offer wisdom.
Exactly. And God loves to give wisdom. So Jesus says we should cultivate the habit of asking for it.
Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened for you. For everyone who asks will receive, and the one who seeks will find. And to the one who knocks, it will be opened.
The God of the Bible is like a generous parent. Even bad parents still want what is best for their children. And how much more, Jesus says, will our Heavenly Father give good gifts to his children when they ask?
And the gift we need from God is more wisdom.
Now, Jesus ends this section of teaching with one of his most memorable wisdom sayings.
Everything you desire that people would do to you, so you should do to them.
When God's wisdom feels far off and life is way too complicated, start with empathy for the other. How would I like to be treated? And how would I want others to offer God's wisdom to me?
Well, I would want to be treated with kindness, with patience. And ultimately, I just want to know that I'm loved.
So start there, and then continue with every ounce of wisdom that our generous God gives you.
The whole central part of the Sermon on the Mount began with Jesus saying, I have come to fulfill the Torah and the prophets.
And Jesus ends this part how he began it. This sums up the Torah and the prophets.
Next, we turn to the conclusion of the Sermon on the Mount.
Yes, Jesus ends with 3 teachings about the choice that we all have in front of us when we hear his words. And that's what we'll look at next.
In the first century, an Israelite rabbi began a movement that he said fulfilled the Torah and prophets, which were his ancient scriptures.
Jesus of Nazareth announced this movement among the powerless, the sick, and the poor who hungered for a world set right. He called these people to radical peacemaking and generosity, and he called this movement the arrival of the kingdom of the skies.
So remind me, what does Jesus mean by the kingdom of the skies?
Well, in the Bible, the skies are the ultimate image of God's realm where life and justice prevail. And so heaven, arriving on earth, means God's goodness, overcoming death and violence here on the land. In fact, the biblical story begins with this kind of heaven on earth place.
Oh yeah, the Garden of Eden.
Yes, walking with God in the garden, sustained by his love, building a home together. This is the way of life. But there was a gate and a path out of the garden that led away from God's life.
Why would anyone ever choose that path?
Well, a deceptive creature appeared in the garden who told the humans that God couldn't be trusted and that the good life could also be found by taking this easier way.
But this path leads to violence and death.
Right. And so the Torah and prophets tell the story about God choosing one family, Israel, and then giving them his Torah, his instruction, about how they can return to God's presence once again, how they can build homes and communities where God can come and live among them, how they can even demonstrate to the rest of the world the way back to God's life.
But even with God's instruction, Israel was also deceived, and they took another path.
Yeah, they were deceived by their own prophets and leaders who claimed to speak on God's behalf. The prophet Ezekiel called them wolves. People who not only take the wrong path themselves, they get others to follow them.
Okay, but now Jesus is claiming that God's kingdom has arrived with him.
Right. Jesus is creating a new group of Israelites who will take the right path. They'll reject deceivers and build something that lasts if they accept this calling. And so, in this closing section of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus presents a choice.
Enter through the narrow gate. Because wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to ruin, and those who enter through it are many. How narrow is the gate, and how constricted is the road that leads to life, and those who find it are few.
Jesus wants to be clear. The path to life is not easy. It can feel confining at times, and you're likely to face difficult trials, but in reality, it is the way to true freedom.
So there'll be people who'll try to lead you off the path of life?
Yes, or as Jesus continues,
watch out for illegitimate prophets who come to you in the clothing of sheep, but inside they are wolves who snatch. Okay, but if they're disguised, how can I recognize them as wolves?
Well, pay attention, Jesus says, to how they live, whether their choices produce life and flourishing for themselves or other people, or not.
By their fruits, you will recognize them. Fruit meaning the outcome of someone's decisions, their way of life?
Right. If you're the kind of person whose actions produce diseased fruit, you won't last in God's new reality.
Okay, but life is more complex than that. I could produce enough good fruit to fool a lot of people, even fool myself.
Maybe, for a while. But you won't fool God, as Jesus says.
Many will say to me on that day, Master, Master, didn't we prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and do many mighty acts in your name? And then I will declare to them, I have never known you. So someone could imitate the actions of Jesus, but never be known by him?
Well, remember, Jesus warned about doing the right thing for the wrong reasons. If our motives are disconnected from our actions, we miss out on the life-giving, intimate connection that Jesus offers with himself.
A connection with Jesus himself?
Jesus isn't just presenting a choice about our behavior. The choice is about how we respond to him. Will we let him transform our ways to be more and more aligned with God's ways? Or, as he puts it next, where are we going to build our house? On the sand or on the rock?
Well, that's a memorable image, but kind of random.
Not really. In the Hebrew Scriptures, the house of God is the most common phrase to describe God's temple, up on the rocky hill of Jerusalem. It's an image of how God's followers can build a community where God's heavenly presence can reside here on earth, just like the Garden of Eden.
So then, everyone who hears these words of mine and does them, they will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain came down, and the rivers came, and the wind blew, and they fell upon that house, but it did not fall, because the foundation was on a rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them, they will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain came down, and the rivers came, the wind blew, and they fell upon that house, and it fell. And its falling was huge. So, build places where God can reside and where Eden can spring to life, because ultimately, those places are the only ones that will last.
Yes. And just like Jesus said at the very beginning of the sermon, a city on a hill cannot be hidden. So let that light shine for everyone to see. Jesus is describing a new humanity who lives together by God's wisdom and love, creating communities of peace and justice in the midst of violence and death that surrounds on every front. In all the teachings of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus has given us a bold vision for what this can look like. And through the rest of his own life, Jesus lived out that vision. And he offered his followers the choice to do the same. And now, that choice is ours.
This is Jonathan Collins at the Bible Project.
And this is Tim Mackey.
So today we're doing something different on this podcast. Instead of having a discussion on biblical theology, which is what we usually do, I want to tell a story.
Yeah, so John got all investigative and he found this really cool story that even I don't know that much about. And so the first thing off here is, what is this story that we're all going to learn about?
Yeah, this story is about two young men, and it takes place at Harvard Business School,
Which is out in Boston.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Now, they both go there for different reasons. They become friends, and they decide to write a paper together on what the Bible has to say about money. And what they see confuses them, it challenges them, it causes their lives to completely change. This is a story about God and money. So, Tim, money can be really dangerous. Doesn't the Bible say the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil or something like that?
Yeah, yep, that's in the first letter of Timothy from Paul. The Bible has tons of warnings about money, but it also has tons of wisdom about what to do with it in really constructive ways, too. The Bible recognizes that money is this paradoxical thing in the world.
Yeah, so I became really interested in this paradox and was thinking about money a lot, meeting people who think about money from a biblical point of view. And through that, ran into these two guys, two young guys making a ton of money in their early 20s. And they plan on making a lot more money in their lives. They have this really interesting story. So I fly out to Nashville to meet them. I bring some audio equipment with me to record them. We're in this friend of a friend's living room, and I'm just trying to figure this all out.
This is Rookie John on the trail.
Oh, you meant snap in the mic. I thought you meant like snap it on, like I had it on wrong.
So that's Greg snapping in the mic. I sit down and I first ask them to tell me a joke I heard them tell once at a church service.
This is John's joke. It's a great pastor joke.
And warning,
It's a really bad joke.
Yeah, so a guy has the chance to talk with God one-on-one, and he's asking God all these questions, and he's like, God, what is a billion years like? And God says, a billion years, that's like 1 second.
What you got to understand about John and Greg is that they're both uber geeky dudes. Greg is in finance, John's an engineer. I mean, this joke is right up their alley.
The guy thinks about it and says, well, God, what about $1 billion? What is that like? And God says, $1 billion to me is like a penny.
These guys are smart, and they know how to make money.
So the guy gets smart and says, well, God, can I have a penny? And God says, sure, give me 1 second.
Yes. And you guys like to start with that. Is that a crowd favorite?
It can be. Yeah, well, it depends on the crowd.
That's how we loosen the crowds up with that one.
So now that we're nice and loosened up, let me introduce you to John.
I'm John Cortinas, currently living in Orlando, Florida.
In his early 20s, John was making $150,000 a year working for Chevron, so a fair bit of coin. And John had secured an overseas job with Chevron where he was going to make $350,000 to $400,000 a year as an expat.
There's all this talk about the 1%. It kind of felt like being not only in the 1%, but in a position where it's like we're maybe the top of the 1% in terms of opportunity, in terms of the ability to build wealth.
And then there's Greg.
I am Greg Balmer. I actually live here in Nashville.
In Greg's early 20s, he was making $275,000 a year working for a private equity group called Advent.
Never explicitly thought I really want to earn this much money for the rest of my life. To be honest, I wasn't doing a lot of long-term planning. Just to be frank, I was enjoying the moment.
So a couple of ballers. So John and Greg have these plush jobs, but for separate reasons, they go to Harvard Business School to get an MBA. And this is where they meet. And they find they have a lot in common. First of all, they both want to make a lot of money in their lifetimes. And secondly, they're both Christians. So they love their families, they go to church, and most importantly, they tithe.
We both tithed before business school, gave 10% of our income, and we thought that's what a good Christian does. You tithe, and then you're good with money. It's like a membership fee to my church, essentially.
So, sorry, did he say membership fee?
Yeah, his tithe was like a membership fee to the church.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Why is that fascinating?
Being generous to your church is part of your membership fee. That's so weird. But actually, it makes sense. In America, at least, think about the word member. If you are a member at Costco, or Sam's Club,
it's going to cost you something.
Yeah, you pay your fee to be a part. And then you are entitled to the privileges pertaining thereto, all that kind of thing. But on a practical note, let's be honest. For many churches, they're working on a budget. If you've got people who really believe in this membership fee,
yeah, that's useful.
Yeah, you're stoked. Especially if it's guys like this. If they're rolling, then they're big players in making the church work.
And the last thing you want is for them to begin to question whether or not they do need to tithe their membership fee.
Well, that's an interesting place I think church leaders find themselves in.
So Greg, he figures this out. In one of the classes, he has to write a book report.
We had to write a midterm book report. And I wrote my book report on a really terrific book by Professor David Croteau called You Mean I Don't Have to Tithe? So I had been a lifelong tither, and it really rocked me because, as you can tell by the title of the book, Professor Croteau argues that we do not have to tithe.
Here, I've got the book up. You can see it. Are you familiar with this book?
No, I don't know.
You mean I don't have to tithe, a deconstruction of tithing, and a reconstruction of post-tithe giving.
Yeah.
So there's some optimism there.
Yeah, right. That's fascinating. I already kind of like the book because it's deconstructing something that's not super helpful to people. Yeah, so the biblical practice of tithing, again, most of our listeners know we're committed at the Bible Project to reading the Bible in its historical, literary context. So the tithe commands come from the laws of the Torah given to ancient Israel. What's interesting, there's 3 places the tithe is talked about in the laws of the Torah, and there's some debate, but what we know for certain is that 10% was not what the Israelites were called to give. They were called to give a tenth of their produce and their land.
That's 10%.
To the temple. Yep, the word tithe just means 10%. Give that to the temple annually. They were also supposed to save up a tithe, another 10%, once a year and hold a big town party and invite all the poor people and Levites that they know. That's in Deuteronomy 14. And then also, every 3 years, you're also simultaneously saving up for every 3 years of a tithe that you donate to the local, essentially, food bank for the poor. So there's some math, differences about are the 2 tithes the same, but at a minimum, an Israelite is tithing 23 some odd % of their total income. What's interesting is that practice is bound up with the covenant between God and Israel. It's like their tax. And that's why it's mentioned in the New Testament. Jesus mentions tithing because people paid a tax to the temple in Jerusalem. But what you don't find is a mention of the 10 or 23% practice being done in any of the earliest Jesus communities in the New Testament. The tithe was specific to Israel living in the land with its temple. The early Christians did something different, which, again, that's surprising when most people learn that.
So you don't have to tithe.
The earliest Christians did not practice tithing, but they were committed to extreme generosity within their church communities. And that opens up a whole new vista that isn't attached to the number 10%. Yep.
And so this is why I like this story so much. We haven't even gotten into the story yet. But John and Greg begin to encounter the Bible and what God actually has to say about money. And it isn't as simple as just write a 10% check. That God was asking for a lot more from them.
And that was a total shift in my thinking. And I didn't know what it was going to look like or what that meant, but I knew that things were going to be changing.
Okay, so we know that both of these guys had a lot of money and they're young. But what we haven't established is that their views on money are very different, completely different. So when you have extra money, you kind of fit in one of two buckets. Either you become a saver or a spender. And now John is what you would call a classic saver.
So my online banking password, which has since been changed, was retire at symbol 40.
John is a guy with a clear objective in his life, obviously. And this began at an early age.
You know, my dad gets home at the end of the day, empties his pocket, sets the keys aside, and drops all the change in there.
So it was like the family change bucket.
Right, except it was mine, you know. It was John's change bucket.
You commandeered it.
The can was underneath the master bed, so go into my parents' bedroom, pull this can out that might even be heavy as it gets more and more over time, and then lay down on the carpet and just dump it out. And you see the money spread out, and it's like, oh yeah, there's all my money. And then the sorting process begins, and you kind of like realize quickly that the pennies are not, you know, they're not going to do much for you, but the quarters are where it's at. And then I had this Post-it note, and I would like write my new total of the amount of money that I had, which, you know, my net worth, basically. I think that was my first image of assets going up over time and getting excited about that.
So John gets the bug for accumulating wealth, and he devotes his life to it. But John doesn't just want to be a slave to making money. He wants a job where he can make a lot of money, but it doesn't require a lot of hours.
How can I make the most money in the least hours? How can I make a really comfortable six-figure income and kind of be home at 4:30 p.m. every day?
So, Tim, you can imagine, John's a number geek. He wants to find the perfect job for accumulating wealth, but also a job that doesn't require you to work long hours. So what do you think a strategy is going to be?
Oh, man. I have no idea.
He's a numbers guy. He loves inputting numbers.
Yeah. People don't use calculators anymore.
No, not calculators. He puts it all in an Excel spreadsheet.
Oh, just like you.
Oh, I'm not a numbers geek.
Our desks are right next to each other, and it's not uncommon for me to look over and see John working on a Google spreadsheet.
Okay, well, imagine on a scale of 1 to 10, like I'm a 3.
Yeah.
John is a spreadsheet 10.
Holy cow. That's hard to imagine.
How did you design the spreadsheet?
Just kind of researching jobs. There's this graph in there that's like hours per week versus total income. And you want to be like in the right quadrant of that graph for like high income, low amount of work.
John makes spreadsheets for everything.
Yeah.
Spreadsheets are my love language.
Tim, guess what the top 2 jobs in his spreadsheet were?
For low hours but high income.
Low hours, high income.
Wow. Not a Bible scholar. Not a doctor. That's what I was first thinking, but that's, you give your whole life
Yeah,
to it.
right. You're on a pager.
Low hours. Something. Oh, I don't know. Something to some computer coders, people who build things. Architects can make a lot of money. You can take a lot of time though.
Okay, you want to hear?
Yes.
All right. The top 2 jobs for working the least amount of hours and getting the most pay, according to John's spreadsheet, were...
The 2 best jobs I could find were being a dentist or being a petroleum engineer. And I was like, I don't want to look at people's teeth because that's gross. So I think I'm going to be a petroleum engineer. Because the starting salaries were like $100,000 a year. You know, you could do that right out of school. And so that's basically what I did.
So John goes to graduate from Texas A&M. He starts working for Chevron as a petroleum engineer. His spreadsheet, dream job. He's pulling down more than $100,000 a year. But that isn't as far into the right quadrant you can go.
When I started learning more about these oil and gas careers, I learned you can make even more money if you go overseas. And so if you're making 100 or 150 in the States, you can go do the same job in Nigeria or Australia or Kazakhstan and make $300,000 or $400,000 a year. And I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to go overseas and do that.
The problem with this plan was John would need 10 years of experience before even being able to apply for an expat job like that.
And I said, no way. I don't want to wait 10 years. So what's the faster way? And they said, well, you can get an MBA and apply to this special program we have, and we only take a couple people every year, maybe 3 or 4 people, but you could try for that. And so I said, okay, that's what I'm going to do. They told me they get about 1,000 resumes applying for that program in a given year. And in my year, they took 6 interns, and so we all interned for the summer. And then they ended up only selecting 3 to get the full-time job, and I was fortunate enough to be one of those 3.
So John has secured his most upper right quadrant job that he can imagine, working in the oil industry overseas. And while I've never personally had a dream of being a petroleum engineer, John actually made it sound pretty cool.
You know, some of the biggest projects in the world are oil and gas, and so I was looking at being on some projects in Western Australia with, you know, $30 to $40 billion investments, just unbelievable scale and scope, and you're thinking about bringing energy to the world. And again, the work-life balance is pretty decent in that industry compared to finance or consulting. They usually provide some amazing housing for you. There's, in some cases, you have a staff, got a gardener and a cook and a driver. You know, I'm promising that to my wife too. Hey, Megan, we're going to go overseas. It's going to be amazing. We're going to live in this mansion on the beach, and there's going to be like people serving us. And so that's kind of what we had in mind. And then all the while, you're putting, you know, $150,000 cash into the bank every year that you're overseas.
Because you're not spending it.
Exactly. Yep. And so I was really excited by the prospect, be on some of the biggest engineering challenges in the world, living like a king and putting away a ton of money the entire time you're doing it.
This is a saver's paradise. But John doesn't want to just sit back one day on a beach with a big retirement fund. John has big aspirations for his family.
Yeah, I was reading books about how to create and sustain a family dynasty. You think of the Bushes or the Kennedys, I was like, what if I could create a family like that with millions and millions of dollars that, you know, does all these great things?
So that's John, a saver with a vision for a family doing great things in the world. And we'll be back to his story soon, but let's turn to Greg. If John's the classic saver, then Greg is a classic spender. Greg was making $275,000 a year in his early 20s. What's a guy like that do with all this money?
Enjoying spending most of it, frankly. So we were living in a fancy apartment in the Back Bay neighborhood of Boston, spending $1,000 a month on fancy restaurants, taking 5-star international vacations.
Now, it's easy to applaud someone for saving money, like John. It's wise, it takes self-control, and it's easy to judge someone for spending money frivolously and carelessly. But talking with Greg about this time in his life, I didn't get the impression that he's a careless and selfish guy. In fact, he told me a story that I think captures why he felt so free spending money. You see, his dad ran a side business. He saw it as a hobby of sorts, where he would import things from China and then sell them on the weekends at the flea market.
I used to go with him every Saturday to the flea market to help sell stuff, and then also, as I got a little older, to kind of manage the money that was coming in. And I remember one day, I was packing up at the end of the day, and I had this big pink box that was full of hundreds of dollars in both paper cash and coins. And my dad tossed me the keys to the truck, and not thinking, you know, just reaction, I dropped the box to catch the keys. And the box broke on the ground, coins flew everywhere in the flea market, dollar bills are flittering away in the wind.
Now you can imagine how upset his dad is going to be at this moment.
The look of horror on my dad's face sticks with me to this day. And then he immediately repealed that look and saw how sad or I felt like I let him down, and he could see that, and immediately sort of changed his countenance and came and helped me clean it back up.
I can imagine Greg there, a little kid, realizing in that moment that relationships are more important than money. You know, money comes and goes. Don't hold on to it so tightly. Don't worry about it so much. The real treasures in life are each other.
In my dad, that moment, I also kind of saw an image of God as like he's our father and he cares for us. He provides for us. So it's a moment that's always stuck with me.
So Greg, he goes on to study finance. And early in his career, he lands this amazing job at a place called McKinsey. And from there, he's hired as a junior associate at a private equity firm called Advent. Now this is the big leagues. This is where you can get uber rich. Private equity, this is where people like Mitt Romney made most of their money.
And this private equity firm collects money from investors, not rich individuals, but rather sovereign wealth funds, university foundations, family endowments, and then invest that money to buy companies. They own those companies for a period of 3 to 5 years and then attempt to sell them for a profit, return the money to the investors, and then take a cut for ourselves. And we're talking big money here. Advent managed an $11 billion fund. The average check that we would write for a deal was $400 to $600 million. I was 26, earning $275,000 a year, and I was the junior guy. The senior partners were earning millions. The leaders of the firm were earning tens of millions of dollars a year.
And as we already established, Greg was having a good time spending it.
You know, it was incredible. And so I'd always grown up in the church, so I knew I was supposed to tithe. So I did tithe during that time. But honestly, two things about that. One is when I was earning that level of income and it was just my wife and I didn't even feel the tithe. A tithe on 275 is 27.
That's 27,000.
I had plenty left. And then two, I always thought of that tithe more as sort of the cost of admission to keep God happy so I could spend the other 90% however I wanted.
Greg's junior associate job there at Advent is about to end, but he's hooked. He wants to come back, move up the ranks, but first he has an opportunity to go do some more school. And he chooses to go to Harvard because
I saw how much the senior leaders at the private equity firm relied on the network that they had created when they were in graduate school. And the way it worked out was my boss and his boss and his boss were all Harvard grads.
So there we go. John, the classic saver, is heading off to Harvard to get his MBA. It's his last prerequisite in order to get his dream job as a petroleum engineer overseas. And Greg, the spender, he's also heading to Harvard to get his MBA in order to go back and make some serious cash in private equity. This is where they meet and form a friendship. And it's in the classroom here at Harvard where God shows up and gives them a paradigm about money that turns their lives upside down. Okay, so John and Greg, they're both heading to Harvard, they're getting their MBAs. First day.
Well, I tried to repress it, then I carried its crown. I reached out to undress it, and love let me down. Love let me down. So I tried to erase it, but the ink bled right through. Almost drove myself crazy when these words led to you. And all these useless dreams of living alone, like a dogless bone. So come let me love you. Come let me love you. And then color me in. Well, I tried to control it and cover it up. I reached out to console it, but it was never enough. Never enough. So I tried to forget it. It was all part of the show. Told myself I'd regret it, but what do I know about all these useless dreams of living alone, like a dogless bone. So come let me love you. Come let me love you. And then color me in. So Come, let me love you. Come, let me take this through the end of all these useless dreams of living. All these useless dreams. All these useless dreams of living. All these
Capoeira is a form of martial arts from Brazil, and it's infused with dance.
just like we want it, just like we need it. Why can't we just like a who says we can't, who says we can't, who says we shouldn't, who says we couldn't make it just like we love it. Why can't we just like a couldn't we make, couldn't we make, couldn't we make it just like we want it, just like we need it. Why can't we just like a who says we can't, who says we can't, who says we shouldn't, who says we couldn't make it just like we love it. Why can't we just like a
Well, I don't know if I'm wrong, 'cause she's only just gone. Here's to another relationship born by my excellent breed of gamete disease. I'm sure when I'm older I'll know what that means. Well, she cried when she should, and she laughed when she could. Here's to the man with his face in the mud and an overcast play, just taken away from the lovers in love at the center. Loving is fine, if you've plenty of time. Yeah, for walking on stilts at the edge of your mind. I said loving is good if your dick's made of wood and the dick left inside only half understood. What makes her come? What makes her stay? What makes the animal run away? Yeah, what makes him stop? What makes him stand? And what shakes the elephant out? And what makes him mine? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. No, I don't know. Yeah. Anymore. No, no, no. Ooh, yeah. Hey, 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 hey. You see, I don't know if I'm wrong. That's 'cause she's only just gone. Tell me, why is this day taking so long? I was a lover of time. When once she was mine, I was a lover indeed. I was covered in weed. And she cried when she should. She laughed when she could. Close to God is the one who's in love. I walk away 'cause I can't. Too many options may just kill a man. Loving is fine if it's not in your mind. But I've fucked it up now. Just too many times I said loving is good if it's not understood. But I'm the professor and I feel that I should know just what makes her come, what makes her stay, what makes the animal run away, what makes him tick apart from his wick, and the lonelier side of the jealousy stick. I don't know, I don't know. Here's to another relationship born by my excellent breed of gamete disease. I finished it off with some French wine and cheese. La vie danse quand elle joue avec moi et je pense que je l'aime des fois. Le silence n'ose pas dire non quand on est ensemble. Mettre les mots sur la vie danse quand elle joue avec moi et la pluie me montre quoi. Non, non, c'est la chanson, la nuit, le vent, l'amour, le sang. D'un
God of creation, there at the start, before the beginning of time. With no point of reference, you spoke to the dark and fleshed out the wonder of light. And as you speak, 100 billion galaxies are born. In the vapor of your breath, the planets form. If the stars were made to worship so light, I can see your heart in everything you've made. Every burning star, a signal fire of grace. If creation sings your praises so loud, so loud. God of your promise, you don't speak in vain, no syllable empty or void. the stars were made to worship so loud. If the mountains bow in reverence so loud. If the oceans roar your brightness so loud. For if everything exists to lift you high, so will I. If the wind goes away, send it so loud. If the rocks cry out in silence, so will I. If the sun will fall, our praises still fall shine. Then we'll sing again 100 billion God of salvation, you chased down my heart through all of my failure and pride. On the hill you created, the light of the world, abandoned in darkness to die. And as you speak, 100 billion failures disappear. Well, you lost your life so I could find it here. If you left the grave behind you, so will I. I can see your heart in everything you've done. Every part designed in a work of art. If you gladly chose to surrender, so will I can see your heart in myriad different ways. Every precious one, a child you died to save. If you gave your life to love him, so will I. Like you would again 100 billion times. But one measure could amount to your desire. You're the one who never leaves the one behind.
We want it to be trusty and true, but feathers fell from our wings.